For those of you who don't know, Allison Heath, she joined, actually, Allison, was it in 2017 or 18? Children's Hospital of
I don't
Philadelphia.
remember either.
Okay. And I will say I have learned so much from her in terms of data. She was involved with one of the first data commons, the NCI Genomic Data Commons, back at her days in University of Chicago. And since then, she has really led and has helped us develop on the CBTN side, continued data resources. So I will let her take it from here.
Great, thanks, Angela. And I know we're running short on time, so I will also try to be fairly quick. I guess I no longer can make some quip about being the last person before the break, now that I've swapped out with Eric. But I think it's been a really great lead up to what I'm going to talk about today in terms of platforms, interoperability, and cloud. And I think, as you've heard, CBTN has really been an exemplar of how to leverage these different capabilities, and I think really pushed us across the board in pediatric research to rethink how some of this was being done. So you saw this figure from Adam earlier before, and maybe what I want to highlight here is kind of, as you go through this funnel, you have, individuals, and then you have platforms on both sides. And so you hear a lot about commons. I think a lot of us have used things like CBio Portal or other tools, the St. Jude PCAN tools, and you have a lot that happens on the platform side here on the right. It turns out, and I think Sam had a good lead up to this, the platforms and the tooling on the left are often the bottleneck today. So I'm going to talk a fair bit about what we've been doing on the left here, and you'll hear from other folks, I think, tomorrow about some of what we've been doing on the right. But a lot of this has really been empowered by cloud-based approaches. So even just that shift from local institutional resources to being in the cloud, even if there's different pockets or different ways that people are using it, it really lowers the barrier for collaboration, for people being able to do this and create collective platform approaches. And so it's been really great to see a lot of this movement towards there and really evolving into the commons types of infrastructure. And so, as you heard, the Kids First Data Resource Center, I think, really was able to take a cloud-first based approach, bring in many different partners, and really think of an integrative approach across the engines, the portals, the knowledge bases, tying together a lot of the technical infrastructure and plumbing, and a lot of this being done on Amazon Web Services, but also looking to integrate with other things such as Google and Microsoft in the future. So a little bit of a CBTTC view towards CBTN. So I was pinging people earlier today about when Harvest launched. And so I think we have some collective memory that is around 2014. And really the first way of being able to see some of this data, visualize it. Over that time span, the Kids First Data Resource Center launched in September 2018 that included initial views of the CBTN data and has really been a use case that's even pushed the Kids First side because of the robust data collection and forethought that was put into how the specimens and the clinical data and the genomic data link. And from there, really pushing forth on tooling and other ways to look at the data that helped across the pediatric landscape. So we had cohort builders, so moving away from just, can I get files, to can I build virtual cohorts? Can I look across different disease types? Using a lot of that curation phenotypic work that Dan has done, Sam has contributed to. And then we've been starting to move more into the variants. So we have the CBio Portal, which is somatic variants. So on the Kids First side, we really started looking at germline variants. How do we do this? It's more sensitive, it's more controlled, but how do we provide aggregations and other ways that make this data more available? And then most recently, adding in the specimens and providing ability to do specimen search, which has led to this week, Harvest being retired and really moving towards the new mode of portals and tools around this. And you'll hear more from Higgins tomorrow, so I'm not going to go too deep dive in here. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that left-hand side. And I think, as Sam was showing, data to information is really hard because data is coming in all kinds of places, all kinds of ways. So data to information is a very hard transition, and then adding on at scale to really be able to collect and meet that mandate of every child, informing it is an even harder task. And I think it really takes a collaborative and a large group of people to do this. And so you look across it, and as saying, you know, there's all these disparate processes, many places are doing it differently. I think CBTN and PNOC and that partnership and really starting to align that collaborative and having that transform from a bunch of disparate processes to collaborative hubs, to collaborative tools, applications, workflows that can really take the data to information is where increasing interest of our focus is. So I'll talk about genomic data first. In some sense, you know, and I don't want to, there's a negative sense because genomic data is huge. It's big data. It's what takes up, you know, 5 petabytes of our 6 petabytes of storage on Kids First. But in some sense, it's well structured. There's good standards, there's good tools, there's good pipelines that people have done. And so the, you know, bioinformatics teams have really collectively across the community come to a lot of these good agreement. And we can say we have these standard workflows and deliverables for genomic data. And not only that, really operationalizing it, and Kavatica being just an incredible engine to drive this forward and also be collaborative. I mean, part of why the genomic data community is able to do this is they have collaborative tools that can compare workflows, they can look at different aspects of this. And this is since, I think, September 2 years ago, but you can see that we, you know, can run at different scales, have different batch, and really operationalize and have standards for every time whole genomes hit. I think, you know, being able to harmonize even thousands of whole genomes every week using this different workflow, monitor it, understand it, and really operationalize that transformation from data to information on the genomic data side. Now, the study data, I think, is much harder. So by study data, I mean information, all the clinical data we're talking about, information about biospecimen availability, metadata about files, really linking that together and thinking about how do you go from all these different disparate data sets to the platforms, the portals, the commons, where people can really start taking that and run it with the different tooling. So I have a little bit of our team here on the bottom who works and actually operationalizes this. But as we were starting to do this, not only for CBTN, for PNOC, but also across all the Kids First studies, really thinking about what's unique to those studies and what's common and what parts of it we can start creating tooling around. So what parts can we say, you know, this is a computer can do, we should automate this human experts need to do. And so what the computer needs to do is show that to the human experts so that they can make a decision and it gets captured in the system. So how do we build tools that support those processes that we were just hearing about in terms of the standardization? So this group of people touch data all the time that isn't standardized, all the time when there's no agreement of data dictionary, and really start thinking through how do we get that ready and prep for when those standards come along, that we can have a pipeline that will go through different tools, different services, and make that available to the community. And so one of the emerging tools for us is something called the data tracker. We're actually looking to rename this. So if anyone has a good idea for the tooling from data to information, because it really started out from just a status update, but it's really turned into a collaborative tool where you can go in, you can provide this information, start looking at it, start doing that data mapping, run reports, and also think about, you know, while I think the ideal goal is that one day we all agree on this, I think the reality is the type of data you need for studying structural birth defects is going to be different than the type of data you need for drug targeting and cancer. It's all the same under the hood, but those are going to evolve and slowly converge. It's not one day going to happen overnight with a flip of a switch. So how do we support that along that process? And so one of the things, again, similar in line with the open targets work that Deanne talked about, doing a proof of concept for CCDI, where we can take the tooling we built for Kids First and have that map to some of the data that's going to be incoming from many different cancer centers, and have that ability to be able to work in the same tooling. There's a lot of overlap between investigators and those different initiatives, and then provide that ability that as new data comes in, as we know, longitudinal, it's very informative that once you kind of do that first expert pass, how does that get automated? How does that workflow happen? And how do we continue to continuously transform data to information using these tools? So I'm kind of going backwards here. So we start from the platforms. I then talked about kind of the Kids First onboarding into the platform. And then there's the nuts and bolts that a lot of people are dealing with in terms of the CBTN data management. So really leveraging REDCap and Nautilus. And this is kind of, I think, very similar to many other institutional resources where you're collecting this data, you need to go through this process of de-identifying it, and then having some form of a warehouse where you have source data, transform data, and hopefully on the other side you get information. And so some of the team here has been really thinking about how do we do this in a way that's hopefully reusable for ourselves and maybe even reusable for others. So one of the tools that we've been using is called DBT, and it allows you to really manage these transforms in a more code-like fashion. So instead of it being an ad hoc analyst doing this work, similar to, I think, the path that genomic data pipelines followed, what's the tooling? How do we allow this to be really kind of reusable codes and modules that we can use? And this is some of the newest stuff that we've been doing, and really thinking about walking all the way back to those source systems such as REDCap, LIMS systems, other data capture systems. And I'll talk a little bit about how we might get to EHR real world data. So just kind of connecting it all together from data collection to platforms. I'm gonna press forth to try and get through this pretty quickly. The last part though that's really important is interoperability. And sometimes I talk about interoperability because a lot of times when you see those steps and those arrows, we need to think about how do we interoperate even between those platforms, between those teams you just saw, the warehousing, the data tracker, the platforms. And so this has been part of an effort called the NIH Cloud Platform Interoperability, which Kids First is part of. There's many other platforms that are involved in it. There's many different things they're tackling. Today I'm going to talk about FHIR just real quick and end on that. I think you saw a couple icons in Sam's slide around this, and I co-chair the NCPI FHIR working group with Robert Carroll from Vanderbilt, who works as part of the All of Us project, as well as Anvil. And really the thing about FHIR, if folks have not heard about it, is it's a standard that allows data exchange. And so it stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. Fast, never as fast as we'd like, including probably me getting through this talk. Healthcare, it is domain specific. So it's not a general semantic web or other kind of framework. It really is targeted at the healthcare side. Interoperability means those standard APIs and references, and these resources are these data building blocks. So as you come up with these standards, as you come up with these dictionaries, you can define standard building blocks and exchange them through resources. And really it came out of the health record side, but what we're doing in this working group is thinking, how do we reuse it for the research side so we can bring the clinical and the research endeavors closer together in more real time. And I'll just say, I became a real big advocate of this for a personal experience where on your Apple phone, you can link your own healthcare information. So on the right is actually my own. I'm in South Jersey. I go to Atlanta Care as my community provider. And I had gone in, I linked my record, and I think all I had was a flu shot. And since I like data, they had been bugging me to go and get my blood drawn. And I was kind of like, I don't want to. But as soon as I saw it on my phone, I was like, oh, okay. I'm going to go ahead and get my blood drawn and see how quick I get my data. I got my blood drawn that morning. By that evening, I had all my tests on my phone. I was able to look through them and display them. And it just was kind of eye-opening that, oh, now I could actually use this. I could share it with other people if I needed to. Everything looked great, so I'm good. But if you go and click in your phone, you can see FHIR source data. And you can see that all the data from your medical records through the patient portal is now showing up. And so it suddenly becomes a way that we can exchange more of this real world data. And then if we can shape and understand research data within it, you can imagine the power of being able to tie this together. So I'm going to kind of zoom through these, but again, these kind of key building blocks of observation. And again, it's in the healthcare domain, so people are thinking about the same things that we're thinking about. It's not like we're trying to repurpose a general internet technology in some sense, but it still uses the standard things that we're used to on the web so that developers, application developers can use this and have standard ways of going between it. So it has plenty of documentation, has lots of thought around patients, specimens, different kinds of care, diagnostic reports, but some of the challenges, you can always call something an observation, but how much context do you want to put in that observation? Is it a phenotype? Is it a specific condition of interest? And some of this is what we're trying to work through in that working group. NIH has really put out a lot of notices regarding the use of FHIR and encouraging the use. I think the real thing in there, though, is the 21st Century Cures Act, and FHIR has really been said that this will be the way that it'll be implemented and operated. And so the ONC has been overseeing and helping with that. So really going back to that end-to-end data collection, data information platforms, I talked about a lot of the tools in the boxes, but I think we often forget about those arrows. And FHIR is really the place that will allow us to broaden those arrows, have less loss of what we're trying to share between us, and have quicker and rapid, as we define those standards, ways for the data to flow end to end. And the goal is really this interoperable and federated capabilities of bringing in all kinds of different data, sharing it, not only on behalf of pediatric brain tumors, but across a lot of the research landscape, finding those unexpected serendipitous connections across different diseases, especially in terms of molecular things that might connect them, and then ultimately being able to feed into a lot of the tools that will allow the different drug discoveries, outcomes, and hopefully impact. So with that, I'll say thank you. There are many, many people involved in this across the Kids First data resource team, D3B, CBTN, PNOC, and it's just been incredible to see how this has evolved over the last couple of years, and look forward to more to come. I'm happy to take any questions if we have time.